So, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Job Spark. It's a Canadian Association of Black Journalists career event. My name is Kubino Duro. I work for CBC Montreal, and I'll be your host for the evening. This session is designed to help emerging journalists build practical skills and learn directly from people who are working in the industry right now. So, before we start, I want to go through some housekeeping rules. Please use the chat and introduce yourself by typing your name, your occupation, and what part of the country you are from, because we are talking to people who are from across Canada, so we will like to identify where you are from. In the chat, you will find a link to download the JobSpark career event program. In the program, you will find the bios of all the people who are speaking tonight, helpful career documents, and it's free to download. And if you fill out our survey, you can have a chance of winning a $100 certificate of your choice by completing the survey. Tonight we have four speakers. Each will be presenting for about 15 minutes, and then we will have 5 minutes for Q&A. Some people say that they will be presenting for about 10 minutes, and then they'll give 10 minutes for Q&A. So please come with your questions, and please use the Q&A box for questions directed to our speakers. That helps us keep everything organized and keep everything moving. And if you would like to pose a longer question, you can email us at cabjjobspark@gmail.com. And lastly, we would like to thank our sponsors, the InSpirit Foundation and the Globe and Mail, for their generous support of this event. So our first speaker is Charelle Evelyn, the managing editor at the Hill Times. She was raised in British Columbia, graduated from Carleton University with a bachelor's degree in journalism. She joined the Hill Times Publishing in 2016, and her previous roles include a reporter, associate editor with the Wire Report, and she's also regularly featured on CBC's Power and Politics, Rosemary Barton Live, CTV's Question Period, and teaches journalism at Carleton University. Her topic tonight is soft skills. So, welcome, Charelle. The floor is yours.
Evening, welcome everybody. Happy to be in here first and kicking things off. Right. So I'm going to talk to you guys about soft skills. Over the course of my career, the common thread that I picked up on is that you can be the best of the best at asking well-researched interview questions, writing leads, nailing CP style, but that is only going to get you so far. So what are soft skills and how do they differ from everything else? I liked this definition from the University of Calgary's continuing education blog. They said soft skills are social attributes that enable you to interact effectively with others. These skills are critical for success in most careers, and as they help you build and maintain relationships, navigate complex situations, and achieve your goals. So what does all that mean? By way of example and contrast, these are some of the hard skills, those technical skills that you would be expected as a journalist to have and generate and have evolve. But when we're talking about soft skills, they include things like these: communication, empathy, persistence, etc. So this is a pretty big list, and we only have so much time. So I've boiled things down into what I think are some of the most important soft skills to cultivate. And first on that list is communication. This one feels a little bit obvious because we're journalists. We're in the business of communication. And yet, some of the worst communicators that you will ever meet are journalists. At its heart, communication is, of course, conveying your thoughts clearly and listening to others. But what does that really look like in practice? Well, first of all, are you being understood? So, are your emails, are your messages clear? Do your editors understand your story pitches? Do other people have to ask you lots of clarifying questions just for you to get your point across? If so, communication might not be so great. Ghosting, it's not just a Halloween issue. Are you easy to communicate with? Do people have to chase you? Are you updating folks about the status of your story? Are you letting your editors know if the focus changed? Are you on track to meet your deadline? Are you responding quickly to editors' messages or are you leaving them unread? Again, these are all things to think about. You also want to think about when it comes to communication, what your style is. And first of all, I mean, what method works best for you and for the people that you are getting in touch with. So is there a preference for using the phone, email, text, Slack messages, etc.? And these styles may not align. You might really love to text, someone might really love to use the phone. In my workplace, in my newsroom, what I do personally is I adapt to however my reporters prefer to communicate. Some people prefer to call, some people prefer to text. That's how I will communicate with them. But that doesn't work for every newsroom. So you have to know what culture that you're in, because you might have to adapt to somebody else. You might have to be the person calling because the person that you need to talk to, they like the phone and they're not going to read their emails for, 4 to 6 hours. Your communication style is directly linked to relationship building with both your coworkers and your sources. So think about things like, are you open? Are you open to ideas or do you shut them down immediately? If someone comes to you with something and do you brush them off and go, no, that's dumb, that won't work. Something that was modeled early on for me by an editor was to always hear people out, even if the answer is ultimately going to be no. There might still be a nugget in there that you hadn't considered. And if the answer is still no, at least you've given somebody an opportunity to flesh out their idea maybe a little more. They've felt that they've been heard and they've been considered and that their idea was worth discussing. And that goes a long way to building confidence. You want to be known as a trustworthy communicator. Are you the type of person people feel that they can talk to? Now, obviously, that is a major selling point as a journalist. You may want to avoid speaking in a way that might give people the impression that you'll say something about them when they're not around. I'm not saying you can't gossip, but know your audience. Um, are you calculating as a communicator? Are you talking to people even though you don't think that they can, advance your story or advance your career? Can you get something out of them? Are you talking to them on a human level? You might not think it's obvious, but trust me when I say that it is incredibly obvious to the people that you're talking to if you're engaging in communication with them, and yet your eyes are kind of darting around the room looking to see if there's somebody more important in the room to be talking to. If you're not on deadline and it's not a matter of, got to get this information and file it now, take that extra minute to talk to people and don't let them think that they're just a stepping stone. And finally, are you engaged? Are you constantly talking or are you actively listening? Remember that the urge to fill a silence is an absolute interview killer, because if you rush in while somebody's pausing, taking a moment to process, you could have just trampled all over a major revelation that could have completely turned your story on its head. And also, people will just think you're overbearing. You don't want that. So when you're quiet, also consider, are you actually listening to what the other person is saying, or are you just waiting for your turn to talk? Part of communication is emotional intelligence and empathy. As journalists, we obviously have to ask hard questions, and depending on who you're interviewing, sometimes those questions require more tact. And that doesn't just apply to sources, but also to the people that you're interacting with on a daily basis. If you're not doing, an accountability interview, then there may be some things you want to keep in mind, such as how what you're going to say is going to make someone feel. If you're in a public place and you're speaking where other people can hear you, how your words are going to affect how this person looks to everybody else in the room, or how everybody else in the room is going to look at you, and whether or not you're trying to win the conversation or if you're actually taking into consideration that they have a perspective, a point of view, and may have their own goals to achieve. Basically, it boils down to treat people like people and not commodities, engage in that small talk, demonstrate that you are also a person. My editor in chief, I think, is a really good model of this for me, actually. On a Monday morning, she will go around and talk to almost everybody in the newsroom, asking them about their weekend, what they're up to, how they are. And that really helps people feel included, makes people feel seen, makes them feel part of the team, no matter what their role is. And that leads into the next major soft skill, which is teamwork. There's a reason that works well with others was always featured on those elementary school progress reports. Journalism is a team sport. Yes, you can sit by yourself at home, set up a website, go out, interview people, take pictures, shoot video, put it online. There's a lot of people who do that and they do it very well. But I've always thought that the best journalism has many hands in the pot, those extra eyes and ears to help take an idea or even a fully fleshed out story and make it better. Now, obviously, strong communication is the foundation for the ability to work in a team, but I think there's some other soft skills in here to look at that really do help. So, adaptability and flexibility, that is major one. You're going to come across all kinds of people and all kinds of personalities. And there's going to be things that annoy you. So, how do you handle that? Can you adjust your communication style to fit the moment, to fit the person? Can you resolve conflicts without going, 0 to 100? Can you move with shifting deadlines? That's all part of working amongst other people and being flexible. You also want to be a problem solver and a critical thinker. When faced with an issue, how do you distill that information that you need? How do you find it? How do you incorporate it into the solution? A big one, I think, is did you try to figure out the answer before asking somebody? If you come to me with a question and I ask you, well, did you look it up? Like, did you Google it? That answer had better be yes. And then here's why I don't understand that answer or why that answer won't work in this situation. I know there's different schools of thought on this. I get pushback on it from people like, you know the answer. Why can't you just tell me? Why are you so frustrating? But I think it all comes down to, can you work independently? Do you know where to find answers? Do you know where to source things? Part of being a team is not making somebody else drop everything to sort out a minor issue for you that you could have handled yourself. Um, if you're constantly making your problems everyone else's problems, you become the problem. And then they're not going to want to help you when it matters. It's that boy who cried wolf thing. Kind of under the critical thinking umbrella, I'm including curiosity. As journalists, we're professionally nosy, but I constantly run into people who take things at face value, which I always think is a little bit strange. You should always want to know more. You should always have another question to ask. If I'm drawing from a real world example from my newsroom, somebody was writing a story about a bill that an MP had tabled in the House of Commons, and the story said that this bill was inspired by his grandmother. And I go, oh, neat. What about her inspired the bill? I had to ask the question because that information wasn't in the story. And then it was just kind of a silence. And then, oh, I don't know. I didn't ask. You cannot just say, oh, okay, cool. Well, anyways, and move on. Because when you sit down to write, you're going to have holes in your story that you can't fill because you didn't bother to ask the pertinent questions. And this curiosity, it extends to other areas like the newsroom, for example. Do you know in your own workplace what other people do on your team? Have you asked them? Do you know what their jobs are and what they entail, what their day looks like? That kind of curiosity and that awareness goes a long way in being a team player. Not saying stick your nose in their business and, get in their way, but have an idea. Time management, another soft skill. You have to multitask, you have to prioritize, you have to set manageable deadlines and goals. If your deadline is 4 p.m. on a Friday, you can't start writing at 3 unless you have traditionally been turning around stories in an hour. You might be juggling multiple stories and need to have many irons in the fire. Editors like to see initiative. So, can you pivot to something else that's already in motion? If your story falls through, probably not if you are starting from square one. And why have I put this under teamwork? Because again, it's not just your time. There could be editors, designers, etc., and they're all waiting on you. And the more you push the deadline, then the less time that they potentially have to meet their own. So all is not lost. If these skills are not your strong suit, there is light at the end of the tunnel. There are ways to improve. First and foremost, engage in some much dreaded self-reflection at the end of a day or the end of a week. Think about the day that you had, the week that you had. Did you handle yourself well in certain situations? How would you approach things differently? Maybe just role play it in your brain in front of the mirror. How could I have had done that in a different way that would have made it more effective? Practice by being part of the world. You can't develop soft skills at home by yourself. You have to be out and about to join something, volunteer, be part of an external team that requires you to spend some downtime communicating with other human beings. That could be a book club, an animal shelter, a D&D campaign. And that's hard. I get it. I'm an introvert. I love being at home in the dark by myself, going down a YouTube hole. But it all goes into upping your game and being a better journalist and person, quite frankly. And have friends outside of journalism. We all need people who aren't also professionally nosy weirdos, and they can call us on it when our soft skill game is lagging. So to kind of sum up everything, why I think this is important, there's this paragraph from the Harvard Business Review article on soft skills that I found I thought was really useful. It said, think of the NBA draft. Teams don't always pick the top college scorers. Instead, they look for players with high potential. These players may not shine on day one, but they often develop into stars because their foundation gives them room to grow. And that's what these soft skills are about. It's about growing. It's into a better reporter, better friend, partner, citizen, and potentially a future newsroom leader. So just embrace that bit of soft. I'll welcome your questions if you have any.
Sabina, are there any questions?
Quab's mic is not working.
Please go ahead, Brian.
Okay, well, my name is Brian Daly, everybody. Journalism professor, University of King's College, a friend of the CABJ, and I'm on the board. And yes, please do put your questions in the chat. We do have a question, Charelle, from Alkesh Sharma, who is an editor here in Canada for MT Newswires. And her question is, from your experience, what separates journalists who grow quickly in a national newsroom from those who plateau after a few years? Cheryl.
Um, I think it comes down to whether or not they are willing to learn. Like you can break news. Obviously, that's usually going to be one of those things that people are going to look for first and foremost. Are you a good reporter? Are you getting scoops? All of those things. But if everybody else in the newsroom is merely tolerating you simply because you are a good reporter, I do think that's where you will hit a limit because you will either get kicked over to another newsroom because people are happy to see the back of you, or you won't get those opportunities because people don't want that person as their boss. They don't want that person. They don't kind of want to see them succeed. So I'm not saying you have to be, Miss Mary Sunshine. Absolutely not. But can you work in a team? Can you be a team player when it calls for, or are you selfishly guarding scoops? Are you selfishly, taking sources? Are you treating people like they're beneath you? Those are the types of things that I think go a long way towards advancement.
Okay, Cheryl, and we do welcome all of your questions. I had a couple questions while we're waiting for a couple more questions, and then we'll throw back to Kwabena. We've had this massive shift, historic moment 5 years ago, COVID, and in academia, we've had to just be sensitive to the fact that if you were a teenager or in your early 20s when COVID hit, that would have had a much larger effect on your life, your ability to communicate, get out there and see people, because those are your formative years compared to somebody who's already established when COVID hit. So, does that factor in to the thinking in terms of job interviews? If so, how might that be the case?
Um, it factors in the sense that, I mean, I do understand that. I've seen it. I've been in the classroom the last few years. Um, I can see the differences. So it kind of it factors in the sense that how have people worked to uh, kind of overcome these last few years? Because at the end of the day, journalism is it's a social endeavor. You have to talk to people and you have to be able to talk to people. So, yes, there's a lot of people who hate the phone. And I mean, I hated the phone when I was in school, but now the hatred of the phone is in the stratosphere. That voice to voice communication, it gets lost. But what you want to see when you're talking to people is, can they actually engage with you? Because if they can't engage with you when you're interviewing them for a job, for example, chances are they're not going to be able to engage very well with people when they're trying to do interviews for stories. So that is why I suggest, get out there. We're not in lockdown anymore. If your health permits you to, obviously there are some people who don't have that luxury and that privilege. And obviously you can make accommodations for that. But if that isn't the case and you have the ability to get out there, I really highly recommend that people do it, just to help give them that leg up or get over some of those areas where they would have missed out on when they were in school.
Okay, and just before we throw back to Kubina to move things along, I did have one more question for the introverts out there. Yeah, I am a natural introvert, and so I do have to take certain amount of time in the morning and even just before my lectures to get myself ramped up to be able to stand in front of people and speak. And you did self-identify as an introvert. Anything particular that you can offer as advice for the introverts out there?
Um, Carve out the time, because you know that you're going to need that time to decompress. You know you're going to need that time to be alone. So if you can carve out the time. Um, I used to live early on in my career when I lived in Prince George, and I lived with two roommates who were incredibly social people. And I'd be working at the newspaper, and then I'd come home, and I just had to tell them, it's not that I don't like you. I like you a lot. In fact, I just went to one of their weddings a couple weeks ago. We've been friends for years, but I'm going to go and I'm going to sit in a cave for 20 minutes, half an hour, and then I'll be ready to, move on with the next part of my life. So make sure that you give yourself that time, because you will need it.
Really solid. Yeah, for young people, you have to learn to manage yourself first, and understand yourself and get to know yourself and work through the particularities of you. So that's excellent. So I'll throw back to Kobina.
I'll just introduce myself. Hi, everyone. I'm Melissa Stasiuk. I'm the head of newsroom development at the Globe and Mail, and I'm going to talk to you about resumes and cover letters and generally just how to make your application stand out. So a bit about me, I'm involved in hiring in the newsroom. I help current staff figure out their next career move. I lead training initiatives, and I generally work on newsroom strategy, figuring out, do we have the right people in the right roles? What are we doing with AI? That sort of thing. And before that, I was in various editing and audience roles. So throughout my career, I have been through hundreds, if not thousands, of resumes and cover letters. So I feel qualified to be speaking with you about this today. So I wanted to mention some common traits, and actually a lot of these were mentioned earlier as well. And I think a lot of this comes through in the interview stage, but it's also good to think about these things when you're putting together your resume and your cover letter. In my role, People often ask me, in 2025, do I need to be an AI expert or a multimedia expert? And those things are good. But generally, I'm looking for these more foundational traits. Are you a critical thinker? Do you ask lots of good questions? Are you curious? Do you come prepared with lots of story ideas? Are you a clear and engaging communicator? And, change is constant in our industry. So are you adaptable? Um, any role that I'm hiring for, I'm thinking about if this role were to disappear in a year or two, could I see this person moving on to something else? So when you're putting together your resume and cover letter, and definitely if you are preparing for an interview, think about how you're showing these traits coming through. So cover letters to me are the most important part of your application. It's really when you can let your sort of personality come through a bit. So you want to treat it like a story and show, don't tells. What I mean by that is I see a lot of cover letters that'll say things like, I'm passionate, I'm hardworking, I'm dedicated, I love journalism. And those are all great things, but they are kind of a given. And so, I would much rather you use the cover letter to tell me how you track down a source that you are really proud of, or how you got someone to tell you information that no one else had, or a story idea you came up with that your manager was really impressed by, or you launched a newsletter or a podcast that was really well received by a particular community or through audience numbers. Think about examples like that, and then use your cover letter to show those storytelling skills that are needed for any role that you're applying for. You want to tailor it to the role that you're applying for. So, think about the organization that you're applying for. What kind of coverage do they do? Is it local? Is it more national? Make sure you're really reading the job description. And when you're thinking about examples in your cover letter, tailor it if you can to ones that are relevant to the role. Keep it to one page. Hiring managers are extremely busy. They don't want to read a 4-page essay about why you are a fit for this role. And to the point about being a clear, engaging communicator, you have to show that you can edit yourself. So really, I would really recommend keeping it to one page. Proofread sounds obvious, but there are many hiring managers who, if you have a typo, if you have a grammatical error, they'll just put your application aside. Oftentimes, there's hundreds of applicants for a single role, and so you don't want to have something like that, trip you up and disqualify you. So proofread it yourself. Have a friend proofread it. Just have that extra layer. I'm going to suggest that you don't let AI write it for you, which hopefully is not controversial among a group of communicators and journalists. That's not to say that you can't use AI as a tool to help you, but don't hand over your cover letter for AI to do it for you. Resumes. So this is where you're going to be more formulaic. You're going to keep it simple and concise. Again, you want it, I often will open resumes that are just huge blocks of text, 3 pages long. I'm really hunting to figure out like what are the key points here. You don't want to do that. You don't want to make it feel like work to go through your application. This is where AI can actually be very helpful. You can ask AI to come up with a template for you and just follow that. There's no need to, really get fancy. You want it to be scannable and digestible. When you're listing your roles or your past experience, you want to list what you did in that role, but also think about the impact you had in that role. So, if I think back to some of the examples I just mentioned, what did you do in that when you were at that organization that left a mark, whether that was a particular story idea you were really proud of, or an article you wrote that had a lot of page views, whatever it may be. Try to think of an example of impact as well as explaining what you did there. And I wouldn't include experience that isn't relevant to the role. So if you're struggling, and again, I would only put a couple bullet points per experience. If you're struggling in those bullet points to connect back to the role you're applying for, then I would just leave it out. A couple other tips. So, know the organization. I kind of alluded to this already, but do your homework. Really make sure you are reading, watching, listening to the organization that you are applying for. What kind of coverage do they tend to do? Is it more local? Is it more national? Are there particular topics that they tend to go deep on? And that'll help you for the interview prep, but also, again, tailoring your application. Apply for roles that match your experience. So I know, when you're first starting out, you just want a job anywhere. You're going to apply to, many, many, many roles. But, just make sure that you are, again, reading the description of these roles and looking at your application. Does it match, what they say is required? And if not, don't apply. You'll save yourself some time. And especially if it's multiple roles at the same organization, it's not the best look if you just apply for every single role that comes up. So, be intentional about the roles that you're applying for. And then finally, I would suggest it does not hurt to reach out to the hiring manager. Yes, they are busy. They may not respond, but I know in my experience and the hiring managers that I work with, if we get a message, whether it's an email or a LinkedIn message from a candidate whose, again, experience matches the role, and it's a thoughtful, concise message just asking for a bit more information about what a successful candidate would look like. Many hiring managers will reply, and again, it shows that you're doing your homework, you're taking that extra effort. You took the time to figure out who the hiring manager is, and I think it shows good initiative. So it doesn't hurt to try. And if you do get a response and you do talk to the hiring manager, then it gives you an advantage of already having some face time and helping your application stand out.
Thank you very much, Melissa.
Can I just do a plug for the Globe Summer Program? Sorry.
Yes, sorry.
Before I take questions, the Globe and Mail Summer Program, which is aimed at early career journalists. The deadline to apply is tomorrow. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, there is a link in the event program with more information, but this program is geared specifically towards early career journalists. There's roles in editing and reporting and visuals, and it's where a lot of Globe and Mail journalists got their start. It's a fantastic program. So the deadline is midnight tomorrow. So if you're interested, please apply. And I'm happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. Thank you for stepping in and helping me through my audio issues.
You're back. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. This happens in live TV all the time. So thank you for stepping up. Brian, I'm going to turn it over to you to answer a lot of questions. I love the engagement that we're getting. Let's answer some of these questions.
Excellent. So I'm going to have some questions for you, Melissa, specifically related to your presentation. And I see Charelle's around. There are some people who had questions I think you might want to answer. But first, let's take questions for Melissa. We have an anonymous attendee who says, could you suggest where to practice soft skills and with whom?
Charelle, do you want me to jump in on that, or did you want to answer that?
I can jump in real quick and and just say, practice them with your friends, practice them like your non-journalism friends, practice them with your journalism friends, practice them with, the people that you are volunteering with at the soup kitchen or at the animal shelter. Those are the types of areas in which you need to create community, and in creating that community, you can branch out, and those are the areas where you will practice, teamwork, curiosity, communication. It's kind of an everyday thing. But Melissa, if you want to add anything to that, by all means.
I think that's a great answer. Yeah.
Okay, and this one would be for you, Melissa. Are there any key points that your cover letter should always hit? Asks an anonymous attendee.
Yeah, good question. Um, I mean, I always like to see story ideas or past stories that people were really proud of in a cover letter. Even if it's not a reporting role, it just gives really good insight into how you think. And again, speaks to the curiosity and sort of the critical thinking aspects that we're looking for. So, yeah, whether it's an example of a story idea you would want to do for that organization or one that you've done in the past, I think it is always a good point to include.
Okay, thanks, Melissa. And we have Temi asking any resume page recommendations for someone switching careers into journalism.
Resume page recommendation?
Resume recommendations that might be interpreted as if somebody's making a career switch into journalism. I guess the first question would be, would you consider somebody who comes
Mm.
from another area, uh, are there any transferable skills that could
Hmm.
come from other industries?
Yes. So I think that's where the cover letter really comes into play because, again, you can show in the cover letter how you think, what your story ideas are, um, even if you haven't necessarily like executed on those in your previous roles. I do think there are transferable skills, absolutely. So yeah, I think if I think back to sort of those common traits, like the critical thinking, the curious, the clear communicator, and being adaptable, um, I think those can come from many different roles. I would say though, like depending on the role, like if it's a writing based role, let's say, um, you need to show some of the writing that you've done, even if it's on, your own Substack that you launched, or having examples like that, I think is necessary if you haven't been in a journalism role where you have those examples.
Okay, thanks a lot, Melissa. And we'll try to get to all your questions. Now they're pouring in, of course, when it rains, it pours. And so we'll try our best. Somebody also, oh yes, Marietta Rita is asking in terms of resumes, do long gaps matter? If she excludes non-relevant jobs, she would have a lot of gaps, 1 year
Hmm.
or more of gaps.
That's a good question. I think, yeah, I think if you can sort of like explain the gaps, and so, whether that is a sort of section that lists maybe one of the lists of experiences, I was working outside the industry in XYZ. Yeah, I think if it's not explained, then it would raise some questions from the hiring manager. But I think if you, even just briefly explain why there are gaps, then I think that's okay.
Okay, Melissa. And, not sure. We can try to squeeze in another one, perhaps, Quabs. What do you think? Okay, let's keep going here. Are Canadian newsrooms typically welcoming to early career journalists, asks Orville, who were both educated and started their careers outside North America, specifically the Caribbean?
Yeah, absolutely. We've had many people in our summer program and in sort of more junior roles in our newsroom who have lived all over the place and did not go to school in Canada. Absolutely. To me, where you went to school, or even if you even went to university, is less relevant than all of the things that we've been talking about, which are, the core skills, the examples of work, that how you think, that's much more important than, where you've lived and where you went to school.
Okay, and then we also have yes, okay, we had another question about international, so I think you've covered that. We do have Fola Shade who is asking, saying, interested in the program for the Globe and Mail. How do you apply for an entry role?
Yeah, so I believe there's an event program that's been circulated, and there is a link in there on how to apply to the Globe Summer Program.
Okay, so check that. And I'll just keep going until Quabs tells me to stop. Nathan,
Brian, I think we have time for like two, three more, and then we'll move on.
well, let's keep going then. Nathan, a freelance journalist in Toronto for Melissa. What kind of experience can an early career journalist acquire and showcase that would stand out? You mentioned multimedia, but you wanted to ask for more direct examples of experience.
hmm I think it depends on the role that you're applying for. If it's a reporting-based role, then experience that shows reporting that you've done. If it's, an editor on a podcast, then again, it would be sort of experience that matches the role that you're applying for. I would say, if it's a student publication, we will look at that too. It doesn't necessarily have to be a newsroom outside of school. And I would say too that we more increasingly have people who have just freelance experience as their first type of experience, which some people ask me, does freelance count as much as if I've had a regular role at an organization? And absolutely, freelance counts the same.
Okay, excellent. So we have space for one more. Melissa from Ebenezer, what are some ways to gain experience if you can't get any experience prior to applying for a role?
Yeah, it's like the chicken and the egg, right? Um, so I think you can show sort of your entrepreneurial spirit. You can very easily sort of launch your own newsletter, or you can kind of build your own website. You can do your own podcast. Like there's lots of ways of um, showing your skills by doing that type of work, and continuing to sort of pitch even on a freelance basis, so that you might get some published work under your belt.
Thanks so much, Melissa. Back to you, Kwabina.
Thank you guys for your questions. Keep them coming. We're going to try to get to all your questions. For those of you asking for the Globe and Mail link, David has shared it to everyone in the chat, so you can click on it, and that's how you apply to that. Thank you very much, Melissa, for your topic. And I wish some of those things that I learned before I got into the industry, I'm good now, but I wish I learned some of that when I was just starting out, because it would have really helped me. So we're going to move on to Allya Davidson. She's working with the Fifth Estate show at CBC. It's in its 51st season. She's the executive producer. She's going to teach us how to pitch. She's won multiple Emmys, RTDNAs, Canadian Screen Awards. She's had her stuff air internationally, and she's very passionate about mentoring BIPOC journalists. So her topic tonight is how to pitch and what makes a story compelling, timely, and impossible to ignore. So let's find out. Welcome, Allya.
Thank you for that very detailed introduction. Yes, I'm Allya Davidson. I'm the executive producer of The Fifth Estate at CBC News. And as you mentioned, we're in our 51st season, Fridays at 9, Thursdays at 7 on YouTube. I'd be remiss if I didn't say that. Part of my job, a big part of my job, is fielding pitches from the team. We're a weekly single subject investigative documentary show. We're on every week, and each story takes, from 6 months to several years to put together. Each of those stories starts with a pitch, whether it's from someone on the team who works here full time, someone pitching from the outside on a freelance basis. And then I also am pitching. I'm working with the team, with senior producers here, with others, coming up with, what should we be covering on the show. So pitching is, the bread and butter of any news organization, certainly the Fifth Estate, and over my years at other organizations in the private sector, documentaries, you really, really have to be able to pitch well. What you're pitching and the format you're pitching in, that changes, but the ability to do it is a skill that will serve you well. As a journalist, as Melissa pointed out, pitching yourself for a job in your CV, for sure, and then in terms of an actual story. So for me, the first thing, and this applies to both freelancers and if you have a position at a show, is know your audience, know what the show is, and then know their audience as well. So whether it's a show, a newspaper, a magazine, who's their audience, who's their target audience, and who do they serve right now? That's really, really important. It's always really clear when someone has blasted out a really generic pitch to many, many outlets, and those are usually the first ones to go into the no pile and usually won't get a response at all. So you really have to be aware of what kinds of stories does this organization cover? How do they cover them? There's a saying in journalism, there's nothing new under the sun. So it's likely that some element of what you want to pitch has been covered, if not by a particular show or columnist or newspaper, but by someone in that organization before. You should look at that coverage. You should know that coverage, know how they've covered it, and how do they target their audience? How do they present their content? And your pitch should mirror that. So, if someone approaches the Fifth Estate, for example, for an investigative show and says, I'd love to profile Wayne Gretzky, I'll say, that's great. We don't do that here. And they're unlikely to hear back on that pitch. That tells me that person does not know what we do at the show. So your first step is really researching where you want this pitch to go. For your actual story, this is advice I give to people at the show, start at the end. So I want people to be thinking about a headline or a title even as they're developing the pitch, because you have to have a sense of what the core of your story is while you're working on it. If you cannot explain in a couple of sentences what the heart of your story is, you don't actually know it yet. So you have to continually work on that, have that as your North Star. Of course, you're going to learn things as you gather. Your focus may change as you gather. All of that's to be expected, but you should have an idea and not sort of just be presenting a bunch of information in a pitch. It should be a cohesive story. What are the elements that you need? How will you get those elements? Especially if you're a freelancer, this is really key to say, these are the things I have, these are the things I'll need, this is what I would need to be able to get those things. And please keep it to a page. I would say maximum 2 if we're talking about a documentary. Editors, executives, we will ask if we want to know more about your story, but you have to really just be able to sell the idea of the story first. And again, with that elevator pitch, with that page. If it takes more than a page to establish what it is you're trying to tell, then it tells me that you may not actually know. So I know I've mentioned the audience. I'm actually going to mention audience a second time because certainly at CBC and generally as journalists, we serve the public. We're not writing or publishing stories for ourselves. So a red flag for me is I really want to talk about because it's not what you want to talk about or fitting assumptions that you have. It's finding a story that'll serve the audience and making sure it's relevant. Why does this story need to be told now? For someone like me who's getting many, many pitches a day, that's what's going to stand out. Why do I have to stop what I'm doing, call this person, and find out what their story is? Of course, there are evergreen types of pitches that are always relevant, and there are many ways to make those stories now stories. For example, through data, and I know my colleague David Mackay is going to talk more about data journalism in his presentation. But if you have something that's an ongoing issue, pull the stats for this year, pull the stats for the last 6 months to really bring it to life. And then, very important, how are you going to tell it? So for me, it's great when I see someone has laid out, whether for a documentary, which is what we do here, the structure of it'll open with, this subject or this character, then we'll get into this issue, then this one, and then this is the accountability we're chasing. Again, it tells me someone has thought through from start to finish, why we should be doing this story. Again, and if it's a host-driven show like mine is, I'm seeing someone incorporate that into their pitch, that this is a journey story, or this is the role the host would play, that again, you've really thought about where this will live as opposed to this is just something I really want to do. In that vein, make sure you're pitching a story and not a topic. So climate change, very important. Cost of housing, also very important. These are not stories. These are topics. I have a source who knows X about an investment that caused Y to happen and drove up the price of Z. That's a pitch. In the last 2 years, this has changed because of this. That's a pitch. Regulators knew X about Y, but did Z. That's a pitch. So you can cover the issues you're interested in, but again, it's looking at a very specific thing to tell the general, as opposed to, there are a lot of unhoused people in the city now. Yes, there are. But if we're looking at policy change that caused that, if we're looking at the pandemic, if we're looking at something more specific, that's when you're going to get someone's attention, especially if you're pitching to someone in a news organization who will likely also follow the news and know about ongoing issues in a city. You have to go deeper than that. This applies to both freelancers and people inside organizations, I would say, which is you also have to pitch yourself a little bit. Why should you write this story, as opposed to, there may be someone who's an expert who already works in this area at that show. Why should you be the person to write it? This is where you're bringing in, I've been reporting on this for this many years. I have these exclusive sources. I have filed these ATIPs and only I have them right now. Anything that is unique to you about the story, the time you've spent, sources you've cultivated, not just, I really, really want to do this. Though I will say, of course, passion is really, really important, but what can you alone bring to the story and bring to the outlet? Do you produce or write in a way that this outlet wants to do, and can you show evidence of that? That's another really great way to pitch yourself as you're pitching the story. And then follow up, ask for feedback. I will say I always try to give feedback. You may not get it right away because I do get a lot of email. Most editors get a lot of email, but people, if they see a nugget in your pitch, will want to help you and will want to get back to you and incorporate that feedback into your subsequent pitches. This is where you do want to develop a relationship with someone and show, I'm listening, I'm watching, I'm learning, and as those pitches improve, you may find more success. I know for myself, I've had a couple stories where I spent a couple years pitching them to different outlets, refining, going again, and then I did end up doing those stories. That even happens at the Fifth Estate, where there will be files that someone's working on for years and years and years, and it's just not the time. They don't have the angle, and then suddenly they do, because they don't give up. They stick with the story. And coming back to outlet shows, you really want to work with this outlet as opposed to, again, just here's a super generic pitch I've sent to 500 people. Here is a pitch for this show or this magazine, and here's why I want you to have it. And I'm going to come back to you with changes you've asked for. I've gone and found this. This is where I want it to be. That passion is always clear. Even if you don't end up getting your story published or produced, you're going to develop a relationship, and that's another way to take a step towards getting your work published. And I left more time for questions because I had talked to Jennifer about if folks had pitches they wanted me to help them work through. I'm happy to do that right now, or just any other questions.
So thank you, Allya, for that presentation. Now I know if I ever want to pitch to the Fifth Estate, I know exactly what you're looking for.
Yes.
So I know I have to come correct if I'm going to pitch to you, because I got all the tools that I needed. Brian, I'm going to bring you back in to help handle all these questions. I'm sure there's a lot of people eager to know about pitching and how to pitch and so on.
Absolutely, Allya. So please do send in your questions related to pitching specifically. And while we wait for those, Allya, I did wonder about people who might be, let's say, new to the country. That does seem to be a lot of the individuals who are attending tonight. So how do you hit the ground in a place where you may not have had those deep roots? Is there a way to speed up that process of getting to know people?
Yes, I would say, and this is an experience I actually have had. I started my career in the UK, even though I'm Canadian, and so I had to do this myself. Read, watch, it sounds really basic, but read, watch, listen, figure out what you like and what you're interested in, and then start just reaching out to those reporters, reaching out to those editors, even if you don't have a pitch, just to meet them, just to talk. You'll find people are much more receptive than often you think they're going to be. I get reach outs like that all the time, and 99% of the time I do end up meeting with the person. You have to sort of step out of your shell, and shout out to the introverts on the call. I've heard that mentioned a few times. I am also an introvert, but this is one of those things where you do have to put yourself out there and send that email, send that cold call, send that DM saying, I really loved your article about this. I am new to the country. I'm trying to figure these things out. This is my background. This is my expertise. Can we meet to talk about it? And most journalists as I said, will talk, will want to talk, because that's how we do our jobs, is we call strangers and we ask them to talk to us. So most are pretty willing to pay it forward.
Hmm. I'm wondering if you ever have anybody who's filed an access to information request and come to you with, let's say, some documents. Talk to us about those people who might have a gift for research and whether the fifth would consider that.
Yes. Yes, we would. I mean, the research is a huge part of what we do at the Fifth Estate. We're always filing ATIPs. They're as just a matter of practice, because as folks probably know on this call or may not know, they often take a very long time to come back. So you file your ATIPs, you let that simmer, you go on to other things while you wait for it to come back. It's going to come back heavily redacted. You then ask for a follow-up and you kind of work with the ATIP officer. So if you get a disclosure that indicates something really big, that's always at least a conversation starter. And to that point, there are some pitches that can be one line. If you have something that's big enough that I've found this, and it's factual, here's how I know it. And if it is something that big, you don't need to dress it up. You can kind of just pitch that.
Excellent. And just before we get to a couple of questions that came in, how do people guard against, from the outside, guard against a news or agency stealing their story idea, their story pitch?
Yeah, I mean, this is not something I've ever seen. I've certainly not seen it at any of the organizations I've done. We don't do it at the Fifth Estate either. It's a challenging one because in journalism, there are many commonalities, many common stories. We've actually had stories pitched to us that we're already working on, and we have to say, actually, we're already working on this, and we've been doing this for a year. I would say just being really open with the editor, letting them know maybe you're pitching it to other outlets. If it is something super exclusive to you, though, if you're pitching to an ethical editor, they would not do that.
There you go. Ethics, obviously a big part of the mainstream media here in Canada. So now we do have some questions for you, Allya. Carolyn Bergeron, freelance writer for Capital Current, asks, do we pitch stories before or after the story has been written?
It depends. So I work in TV. We're a TV show. So in our case, it's before, because, the investment to make a 1 hour documentary is significant. So normally someone won't have gone out and filmed an entire hour of content and then bring it to us. You have to have done some of the work. You have to have stood it up. Being pitched notions is always really challenging, sort of the interesting if true. We need some of the if true. So that means you have made a few calls. You have a proof of concept for your story. Do you need to have written the whole thing? For me, no, because I'm speaking for an investigative show. We are going to do that work together and dig into the story, but I need to know, there's a proof of concept there. Something I have said to people before is sending me a newspaper article is not a pitch. You have to have done some legwork.
Oh, sorry, Allya. I'm wondering if you have to be a CBC employee to have a pitch, or does that matter one way or the other?
It doesn't. It's certainly, I know we have a dedicated staff at the show, and we're lucky to be the last remaining, full format English language investigative show in the country. But they are primarily the people who do stories for the show, but not always. If the story is strong enough, then we do find a way to make it work. We work with partners at APTN, at our sister show Enquête, at Radio-Canada, with freelance journalists. It really does, if it's a really strong story, we will find a way to second someone if they're at CBC. I'm looking over to my boss, Brody Fenlon, about those sorts of things. And then also bringing in freelancers, finding the funding to do it. We do it usually, at least once a season. It's always very story driven, though. It's not just, I like this person, it's we have to do this story, and whoever comes with it, that's how we'll do the story.
Okay, and we have a question here from Sanjan asking about is there, sorry, they say they use a search engine optimization technique to find story ideas. They say they haven't been hearing back from editors. Is there any tip to catching an editor's attention, standing out from the crowd, if you haven't covered that already?
So I would say that goes back to, for me anyway, I'm looking for the headline. I'm looking for that hook early, high up in your pitch. Sort of, hi, I'm so-and-so. Proposed headline, kind of right there. This is the story I'm proposing. It is challenging, certainly in the investigative world, for what I do, to receive pitches that are, based on searching and on doing your gathering at home. You really need to be in the field, cultivating sources, getting exclusive information, and that is really difficult to do from behind a computer. To get something that's original, you have to be out in the world, meeting people, as Charelle mentioned earlier, to, know a variety of people, learn about different things organically. It's really, really hard because when you're Googling, you're looking for something you already know. You're putting in search terms, whereas you're looking for something you don't know when you're wanting to pitch a story.
Okay. Just before we throw back, thanks to Allya. Before we throw back to Quabs, I'm just wondering for those people who have exceptional talents as documentary filmmakers, people who may have been filmmakers and were wanting to showcase their shooting and editing talents. Has the Fifth ever run a co-pro or some, run a piece where where somebody from the outside did the producing of that piece, the shooting, for example, the editing?
Um, So the shooting, we have a really, really solid staff of shooters and editors here at CBC. So the Fifth Estate is staffed primarily by those folks, but there are always exceptions. We've worked with freelance editors before. We've worked with freelance shooters before. My role at the Fifth Estate is editorial. So I oversee the writers, the producers, the hosts, the people who are crafting the stories and doing the journalistic narrative in terms of hiring technical staff. That's not as much what I do. I'm editorially focused.
There you go. Okay. Thanks a lot, Alia. Back to you, Quabs.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Allya. That was very insightful. I'm gonna try and think of a pitch for you. Don't hold me to that though, because I don't know if I can come up with something to your standards. I probably could, but I'm working on some other things in Montreal right now. So we're gonna keep moving on. Thank you for your questions, guys. Keep them coming. We're gonna go to our last speaker in the early career session. It's David Mackay. He's the managing editor at Canada's National Observer. He oversees news, essays, opinion writing, investigations, and drawing on more than 2 decades at CBC. He's won awards. He's a co-author of 3 journalism textbooks teaching at Toronto Metropolitan University, Carleton University, and University of King's College, where Brian Daly works. David's topic is demystifying public records. Over to you, David.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for that. Okay, so public records, demystifying them. I mean, this really, I think, is about if Charelle talked about soft skills, this is about hard skills. Okay, and if we are going to be giving people information that is credible, that is not necessarily AI driven, it has to come from credible sources. And this is particularly, I think, important at a time when trust in journalism is not where it needs to be, where people are not consuming um, the products produced by media outlets like the CBC, like Canada's National Observer, where I work, as much as they should. So I think it is incumbent upon journalists to really go back to the basics. And what are the basics? To me, the basics are public records. So yes, data is a public record, but data is just one example of many public records. Annual reports, audits, court documents. And these are the kinds of public records that the Fifth is very probably wades into every day on a regular basis. Uh, Filings by publicly traded companies, right? So if we are going to a committee meeting in Ottawa where I am, and you've got the head of the major grocers who are going to be hauled in and questioned about the increase in food prices, probably not a bad idea to look at Loblaw's most recent interim filing to find out how much money they made. Are they gouging? How does that income compare to previous years? Is that income increasing their bottom line? Is that increasing, say, more than their revenue? Those basic line items that we don't have to be necessarily business journalists, we don't have to be lawyers, we just have to be curious, and we have to be resourceful and just look at the bottom line. I mean, we've got a budget coming up next week, next Tuesday. What's the first thing that you look at? One of the first things you look at is the tables, right? And you look at the bottom line. So that is an example of a public record. And in those financial statements, you do have data. So it's not that hard. I was doing I teach all the third years at Carleton University multimedia skills, and I usually um, go around the horn and just ask people, so data, what do you know about data? How would you rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 5? And I think the median was about 1.5 or 2, something like that. And a theme that came up over and over and over again is fear, absolute fear when it comes to a number, panic, right? And that really shouldn't be the case. And I think that we as journalists, as educators, really have to think about that. We need to demystify that in a hurry, because I say to my folks, I say, well, okay, so you're really afraid of a number. So does that mean that if a politician just gave you a number, would you just report on that without asking any questions? Well, of course you wouldn't, right? So, I think that we have to develop our critical thinking skills when it comes to data. So, why is this important? Well, we're storytellers, and data exists on open data portals at the municipal level, at the provincial level, at the federal level. So let's take a look at the largest market, Toronto, and what are some of the questions that we might have. There's a huge issue about bail reform right now, and the Liberals are being hammered by the Conservatives for not being tough enough on crime. Well, that is really kind of an absurd statement, because if you take a look at crime, and if you just take a look at criminal code, there are probably about over 350 offenses, right? For assault alone, there are several different types of assault. For homicide, there are different types of assault. So we as journalists have to be very conversant in that. So we can download data from the Toronto Police Service's open data portal. And if you wanted to find out what is the most dangerous neighborhood in Toronto that has the highest number of assaults with a weapon, you can do that. Okay. If you wanted to find out, if we wanted to go beyond Toronto, we wanted to find out what are the communities that are hardest hit by climate change. How would we determine that? Well, it turns out that Nova Scotia actually has been one of the provinces that has been asking for the most in terms of disaster assistance when you compare them to other provinces over the last few years, right? How do I know that? It exists in the data. And I must say, and there's been a reference to this a couple of times, we journalists have to not only get data from open data portals, but from using access to information, either informally or formally. Okay? So those are the really hard skills that we need to learn. Can I share my screen? Is that possible? Can I share my screen?
Let's check this
David,
out.
I will make you a co-host.
Okay,
And you
because
should be there.
I'm a proponent in showing. Okay, so I can share my screen. Okay, I'm sending my request.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, hang on here. So, all right. So let me share my screen. Okay, everyone can see that. So this is I have a website, and I'm happy to share this link. And this is a website that's got dozens of open data links, and I'm happy. But let's look at crime, just because it's a huge political issue. It probably is the reason why the Liberal government is speaking openly now about the possibility of its budget being defeated, because it was unable to capture some key ridings in the 905 and the GTA because of crime, because they were being seen as soft on crime. So the nice thing is that the Toronto Police Toronto Police Service has a really, really, really good open data portal. Okay, and so it takes a long time to load, but it's right here. And so if you open it up, here's a map of all of the different offenses, right? And you can actually filter this. You can download the entire thing, okay? And then you can, when you download the entire thing, it looks like this, okay? It looks like this. And this is the actual table itself, right? So if you take a look at the table, and this is how I was able to answer some of the questions that I had at the beginning of this presentation. So you have the let me just scroll over to my left here. So you have the ID. So every time an offense is reported to the police, there's an ID that goes into the system, and then they start plugging in information, right? So you have the time, you have the year, you have the month, you have the day, okay? And if we go over here, okay, now what I've highlighted in yellow are really the things that we really care about, right? So if we are going to be making a pitch, these are the kind of details that we want. So the location type, right? So, if we talk about offenses, okay, and I'm just going to put my filter on here, okay, if I just filter this, say, for assault, okay, so where do a lot of assaults, and look at all the different kinds of assault with a weapon, okay, assault, bodily harm, et cetera, et cetera. Where do a lot of the assaults take place in different locations? We can see here at apartments, bar, restaurant, cargo train, commercial dwelling, community home, community group home, construction site, convenience stores, gas stations. This, folks, is fantastic data. Okay, and if we scroll over, these are the neighborhoods, right? So you might want to, a typical question you might want to have is, what neighborhood has the highest number of assault with a weapon, and assault with bodily harm, right? So then you can answer that question easily, okay? And here, Moss Park is right up there when it comes to assaults, and then we can divvy the assaults by different categories, okay? So what is it about Moss Park? I don't know. I'm not from Toronto. I live in Ottawa. But then we can go to the neighborhood profile, right? These are the neighborhood profiles here. We can go to the neighborhood profile, and we can search Moss Park, and we can get a snapshot. We get at a glance families, language, income. And what this does is it compares the neighborhood profile to other neighborhoods and to Toronto. Okay, so all of a sudden we can get beyond the run-of-the-mill stories and really dig into good local stories with reliable data. And what's really interesting about this is that this is the kind of stuff that I can teach my third year students, my master's students, etc., in literally hours, in a few hours, and then they're off to the races. So when we talk about demystifying, all you need to do is to download and to sort and to filter. There's really not a whole lot of math involved. Okay, so I'm just going to stop sharing right there. And so how do you acquire these skills? Well, you go to conferences. You belong to organizations like the Canadian Association of Black Journalists. You go to Canadian Association of Journalism conferences. If you want to go farther afield, and I'm sure that there are many people at the Fifth who have gone to NICAR conference, the National Institute for Computer Assisted Reporting, or the IRE, for example. And you learn. You learn from people who are really good at it. You ask them questions. You read stories. You ask a lot of questions about the stories that you read, just to get an idea of what you want to what stories that you want to tell. So why are these skills important? I would say, in one word, survival. if we want to survive as journalists, as storytellers, if we want to distinguish ourselves from the wannabes, from the, I mean, anyone can have a Substack, anyone can have a website. Okay, so if we want to distinguish ourselves, like for us, Canada's National Observer, we are about to go on a membership drive. We do 2 a year, and it's our lifeblood. We don't raise money. We don't live to fight another day. And what we have to offer our subscribers essentially is original stories. One of the best ways to get original stories, quite frankly, is by data, open data sets. Okay, and so this really does work. Okay, so how did I get these skills? By doing the things that I'm asking you folks to do. I went to conferences. I got mentors. I asked lots of questions. And interestingly enough, now that I've been teaching for quite a few years now, many of my mentors are my TAs and they are students, right? Who are learning a lot of really cool skills. One of my mentors was a computer science student, and I'm not saying that I've become a computer science, but by talking to people who are in different subject areas like computer science or geography, we teach ourselves to ask different questions, right? That I think inform our journalism, make us much more critical thinkers. So where does that leave all of you? I would say practice, practice, practice. Look for opportunities to learn this stuff. Um, if you wanted to find out any open data site, go Toronto, open data, Ottawa, open data, Toronto Police Service, open data, right? Just use the open data phrase with any with any public institution. Okay. The Toronto Transit Commission, for example, hospitals, school boards, I mean, you name it. Okay. The list is endless. So I would say practice, 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 read. Probably one of the most important things that I do every morning is I read. Now, when I was stuck watching the Blue Jays at the bottom of the 18th inning lose the other day, I didn't do much reading the following morning. But generally speaking, I try to get up at a decent time and I read for a couple of hours, right? And I read and I make notes. And I actually make notes when I read. And if I see a number that's really interesting, I want to know where did that number come from? And then I go I get into a bit of a forensic exercise and I try to find that number. So read, 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 and this will really help your critical thinking skills. And I would say that, find a mentor and practice as much as you can. So I've been timing myself. I think I'm at about 15 minutes and I'm going to stop talking and hopefully entertain some questions.
Brian, I'll bring you back in here to host the question session. Brian, take it away. And thank you very
Absolutely.
much, David.
You're welcome.
Absolutely. We have time for one or two questions. So we do have a question from Wanja. David, what tool do you use to sort and aggregate data? What's your favorite tool?
Okay, there's two answers, and it depends where you work. My favorite tool is Excel, but you can do all of this with Google Sheets. The only caution I would have with Google Sheets is that the Toronto Police Service data, it's about 500,000 records or rows of information. I don't know that you'd be able to download that entire thing into a Google, upload it to a Google Sheet. You'd probably have to filter it, reduce the number of years. But you can certainly use a Google Sheet to do all the kinds of things that I did that you saw on the screen.
Excellent. Now, how do you guard, this is a question, from Charelle. How do you guard against reporting on bad data if the source got it wrong?
Well, that's a really interesting question because we were working with the Toronto police data with some students. And it turned out that when we tried to download the data set, there was something funky going on. It did not bear any resemblance to what we had actually filtered and we saw on the website. And we asked the police service, what's going on here? Is there something wrong? And this is really important. Under the open data concept, we have every right to not only ask for data, but we have a right to question about the authenticity of the data. And to make a very long story short, it turns out that there was a bug in the system, and that the Toronto Police Service was allowing people to download only a partial data of what was actually available. And so they are going to fix that, and they tell us by mid-November they are going to they're going to let us know. So I would say that the way to do it is to take notes and to double check that what you have downloaded is actually what's available on the screen, and then you have to test the data, right? You have to test the data in many ways. You can what I like to do is to talk to the keepers of the data, and you can say, hey, this is what I've done. Like, what are these numbers correct? Work with a partner who can check your numbers. There's a number of things that you can do, but I would say that the Toronto Police, the data is pretty good. I always have to remind my students that you have to specify that this is reported. These are reported crimes, not all crimes. These are reported crimes, and they're also raw numbers. They are not per capita, right? So,
Right.
yeah.
Exactly. That's all the time we have. Michener Award winner David Mackay. For those of you who don't know what the Michener is, do look it up. It's as good as it gets.
Thank you.
Back to you, Quabs.
So I want to say thank you to all our early career speakers, Charelle, Melissa, Allya, and David. Thank you for sharing your knowledge and your experience with us. I think everyone who is listening and watching this is going to go home with something just based off what you guys said. I, even as a journalist in this business for about 7 years, is going to take some of the stuff that you said and apply it to my skill set. So thank you very much for all of that. Also, I just want to remind everyone to please complete the survey using the link program. Your input really helps us for our future events, how we can make them better. And tonight's session is also being recorded and will be available next week on the Canadian Association of Black Journalists website for you to revisit, share, and get some of that knowledge that you may have missed. And now I will turn it over to our next host, Linton Gardner, who will lead us into our next segment of our event. I'm Cubino Duro, and I thank you guys for letting me be your host for the first part of this session.
Start out with one of the questions that we've prepared, and it's about burnout and stagnation in journalism. They're often linked, but they're not the same. And I want to know how you define the difference, between those two. And Ms. Zodu, if you would please start us off.
Sure. Thank you. And thanks for the introduction, Linton. It's great to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well.
And I'll just say, Brody and I worked really closely with each other until just like 7 months ago. So it's pretty fun to be here with him.
Mhm.
I can say that I've experienced both burnout and stagnation over the course of what was a really long career that I mostly loved. But when I think about the difference between the two, I would say I think about it in terms of how it feels physically. For me, stagnation, which happened kind of, maybe I thought of myself as mid-career at the time, but it was pretty early in retrospect. I felt like I was full of energy that I didn't know where to put, frustrated, just kind of like a coiled spring, really, really unhappy and kind of maybe not pleasant to be around all the time. And burnout, which happened later, I was still loving my job, but I was tapped. It's like I'd run out of gas and I didn't know how to refuel. And so for me, the difference in energy is what I think about as being the difference between those two feelings.
Mhm. Mr. Fenlon, what has been your experience in terms of those two issues, burnout or stagnation?
The one way to think of it, or I've thought of it, is the bed test. Like, if you're in bed, dragging your heels to get out of bed to go to work, and it's because it's the same old, or you're just not feeling challenged and you'd just rather take a day, you might be bordering into stagnation. If you're lying in that bed thinking, I am just exhausted to the bone and I can't muster the energy to do this anymore, then you might be looking at burnout. There's a really great model called it's called the stress curve, and if you Google it, you'll see different versions of it. But it's this idea that you can be at one end of the spectrum of, not very many demands on you, not a lot of performance happening, spinning your wheels a bit, and in that zone is boredom. And then as you work your way up to the optimal zone of being lots of demands on you and a lot of activity, and you're performing, that's the sweet spot to be. And then the stress curve tips into what is like strain and too many demands, and you're not keeping up. Your performance begins to suffer. And on that end of the curve is generally burnout. And I've found that as a useful sort of chart of where am I? And it's normal to be in all places at various points in your career, even various points in the year. But if you're too long in those ends of that stress curve, you're not in a good place, and you need to do something.
So you need to do something else, or change what you are. So that clearly defines sort of what burnout is about. But stagnation, I think, for some people is another issue, in the sense that people maybe feel caught in their profession. Maybe don't feel that they've merited the or at least get the kind of respect that they think they merit. May not have opportunity to move from one field of journalism to another, from daily to investigation to whatsoever, and that sets up a lot of frustration. So what do you think, what kind of flags are there in terms of that may be leading journalists to that, and eventually, burnout?
Ruth, do you want to?
Sure. For me, it's what Brody was talking about, is that yourself. And I loved the conversation that happened earlier about when Brian Daly was talking about really knowing yourself being kind of something that you have to do as a journalist. I think being in touch with yourself enough to notice that change, watching the people around you respond to you, and being able, you can lose touch with yourself in both, I think, especially with burnout. With stagnation, I think you can sense when people have had enough of your complaints, I think. And that's, if you find yourself ranting and not doing too much, you can look in the mirror, or you can look at the faces of your closest loved ones and friends. And if you're looking for it, it will tell you that's where you're at, and that's the time to take stock and act.
Right. Mr. Fenlon?
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. I mean, there is an element of in stagnation, you can find yourself frustrated. You can find yourself feeling overlooked. No one cares. They don't see me. And then there's a point where you have to end looking for the external things that are causing you grief, and then begin to realize, actually, it's time that you need to do something. And that's a pivotal point for people, because some people never get out of the point of just it's this place doesn't work, my bosses don't get me, and they can't get out of that spot, and you can get yourself into a rut, and it's almost self-perpetuating, because you dig deeper into the rut. So it is truly about knowing yourself, and really good to get some perspective from the people you actually trust, or who love you and will tell you hard truths. And as for a burnout, I mean, for me, and I've experienced both things in my career too. Burnout is the battery really is low, and it's hard to charge it up. And I find personally what I'll be snapping first at home, where it's safer, unfortunately, to snap, and then snapping at work and having short patience, and And then I know that those are signals actually that I need to course correct because I'm reaching burnout.
I understand. Well, to what extent does the newsroom culture, the politics, the elements of risk aversion, what does that play in terms of, or is there a part of that causes sometimes or can contribute to burnout or stagnation of a career? All right, Ruth,
Well,
would you take that?
Yeah, you
yeah,
go
go ahead.
ahead, Brody. I'm mulling.
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, I would, first of all, the nature of what we do, especially if you're in daily news and that kind of a newsroom, I mean, these are high-paced pressure cooker jobs with deadlines, fast pace, U-turns, the unexpected happens. That is the business, and there's a lot of adrenaline, and I think you become wired. I was just at a retirement event tonight, and somebody said for journalism, retirement, it should be called rewirement, because you really do, you get wired into that kind of constant turn, constant churn. And the problem with that is that it takes more effort to pause, stop, look around, what is actually happening, how am I actually doing, how are my colleagues doing, and it's not a natural thing to take stock and pause. So I think that's the one way that we contribute to burnout is because the job itself is at a pace and at a level every day that you actually become rewired, and sometimes rewired to a place that's not healthy.
Well, Ruth, pulling on some of those things that he's just mentioned, there is a great great deal of support for early care, for early career journalists, but less focus on mid-career professionals and seniors. What impact did this have on on those who have already, been in the business, given what Brody has outlined?
Yeah, we spend a lot of time with early career journalist training. There's so many tools to use, and there's so much energy that goes into onboarding, a word I really don't like, but I'll use here. And once you have all those skills and you're good to go and it looks like you're performing, it's easy for leaders around you to just think like, okay, they're good. As long as they're producing, you're pitching, you're showing up. Uh, Unless you actually are having a conversation with a leader or a colleague about it, about how you're feeling or what you're looking for, or the change that you need, or the support that you might need, people are not going to come to you. And I do think, as Brody said, it's a factor in that high pressure environment where change is it's more and more and more constant. It just feels impossible how much change is happening. Your leaders aren't they're solving problems.
Right.
And
Putting out
and you
fires.
don't want to be the problem, but it needs to be addressed, right? So I do think it's a gap for sure. And the people, I know we'll get to solutions in this conversation, but I do think that the people that I see adapt and figure it out are people who know themselves well enough to start having conversations before it's a crisis.
Mm.
Yeah,
Well,
maybe I could give you an example, Linton, just from my own career.
absolutely.
Yeah, there was I guess I mean I would have been a good 10 years in, no, 12 years into the business. I was at least 4 years into a job at the Globe and Mail, and it was a good job. But I was at that point where I was doing fine and I was left alone, and feeling like a bit spinning my wheels and feeling like I'm not really recognized or seen, but I didn't talk to a soul about it. And then, I got an outside opportunity, and it was to go help launch the Huffington Post Canada. And when I told my boss that I had accepted this job, suddenly there was this mad scramble, and I was pulled into the editor-in-chief's office, and they started talking about an opportunity I had never thought about or heard was even a possibility? And
Right.
are you sure? And why don't we get a job offer written up to you? And for me, it was, well, first of all, it was too late, but it was
Okay.
also a really good lesson for me that, it wasn't that people weren't necessarily thinking about me or understanding that I had some value, but I hadn't sought the conversation out. I hadn't done any work to kind of say, hey, I'm really interested to know what's next.
Mhm.
And I learned a bit of appreciation for the fact that as harried and busy as I was as an employee, so are the people running news organizations. They're as stressed and as maxed out as everyone else. And
Right.
so their capacity to think about your needs or your particular career is going to be small unless you put it on their radar. That was
Right.
the lesson.
All right. Did you have a similar kind of experience, Ruth? Amidst the issues around your family responsibilities, your personal status,
Oh yeah.
how you were feeling as, it's stable, your stableness and so on. Does that kind of thing affect the career opportunities within and career decisions within journalism?
Yeah, for me it did. I was when I talked about the period of stagnation earlier, this was what was happening. I found myself a single mom uh, in my late 20s with a child with a pretty serious disability and no support system, no
Mm,
family in the city, no, just it was me. And I was in journalism.
right.
So that's a challenge, right?
Hmm.
And I was lucky to be working on a show that had long deadlines, things were planned, uh, and I could leave when I needed to leave because daycare, anybody who's got a kid knows daycare workers do not understand journalism, and there's a deadline. They've got
For any
deadlines.
job, I don't think.
Yeah, so for me, I was looking for a very particular opportunity that met all of those things, met my creative needs, and I was not successful. And at the time, frankly, I had a boss who did not want me to leave and did not support my desire to try secondments or, the things that can kind of give you a bit of creative boost.
Mm-mm.
Um,
And
and
flexibility.
so that was my period of stagnation was this is what I have to do now and there is nobody else to do it and it's what I'm choosing.
Hmm.
But it can make you feel trapped for sure. And yeah, and it took a while and I managed to find, a way to do things that felt creative and satisfying until things changed. And frankly, the change that happened was I was laid off.
Right.
The show was canceled, and then you got
Hmm.
to figure it out. And it turned
Yeah.
out to be a catalyst.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Well, in that vein, being laid off or stepping away because of, familial concerns or your individual health concerns,
Hmm.
what happens to, what are the risks or rewards for journalists who do take that step away, and can they come back to the industry, in an effective way? Both of you have alluded to some kind of changes that you've talked about, within your career path. What was it like for you, Brody? After you made that change, after you realized that, it was too late for you to move on with the bureau that you were with, and you went on to something else. But apparently, you may have come back after that. What are the risks and rewards for somebody to step away or change or change venues during their career?
Well, I'll tell you about a different change I made, and it's more recent history. In 2018, I left journalism. I left the CBC, and I to go teach. And I left for a few reasons. There was a life change happening with my kids were still in high school, but my wife, who had carried a heavy load because of my job, had suddenly gotten a big job herself,
Right.
uh, running a major organization, and it just wasn't going to work. Our jobs, something had to give. So that was one of the factors. there was a bit of stagnation happening as well, and I felt I was on a bit of a unrewarding grind, and so all of those things came together, and I went to teach journalism. And now it was adjacent to the profession, so it was,
Right.
I think that was an easier step away, and
Mhm.
therefore easier to come back. And I did come back a year later. The risk was, though, that I stepped away believing that there might not be a return, that I really was done, and I was mentally prepared for that. I was the reward was learning new things, a totally different lifestyle.
Right.
I remember the first few days getting home and having so much evening with my kid.
You
Like
didn't know what to do, right?
I didn't quite know what to do. Yeah, and I think that one of the cons of it was, anyone in our profession, it is such an integral part of your identity, is to be a journalist or to work in a news, like it is who you are. And when you leave that, I don't think I'm the only one who wrestled with, oh my, like, who am I now?
Mhm.
I have to reinvent, and I had a lot of investment and attachment to who I was as a journalist, or someone running a news organization, and I had to, that was a challenge. Um, and but I think ultimately there's lots of ways back, and it is it is good sometimes to see whether or not the grass is actually greener.
Right.
And I learned a lot. I learned that I love teaching, but I missed my peers, and I missed the intellectual debates and
Right.
conversation we had as a peer group,
Mhm.
which suddenly was not quite there. And ultimately, I'm better for having left. So when people come to me, and they do, and they say, I think it's time for me to move. I say, go for it if you really feel it's the time. It may be the best thing for you. It's certainly, no matter what, will clarify for you a little more intel on what works for your career, and then you'll realize what you miss as well, and you
Right.
might want to find it again.
Well, it seems that you both sort of found out who you are in your experiences, your
Yes.
hiatuses from, from the industry.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that a bit, Ruth, in terms of, how it felt getting back in? Was it easier to get back in because of your experience, because you were a known commodity, or because you were more better prepared to deal with it, having dealt with some of the other issues that were in your life?
Well, so just to be clear, I actually didn't leave the CBC. The show I was on was canceled.
Okay.
And it's funny. I have a colleague who was doing exactly the same job, a close friend. She left. She decided she only wanted to work on the show that we worked on. The show got canceled. She's now a teacher. She loves teaching.
Okay.
She found her place. I was determined to stay at the CBC because it was my home.
Hmm.
It just felt like the right place to be. But I went from the third floor to the second floor to a completely different culture and had to start at the bottom as a casual associate producer after producing for a network television show for many years. Um, and people didn't trust me to do the job. It was actually incredibly difficult, even just that little move. But I would say, for people who leave and come back, one thing, I've been on the hiring side of people returning to the
Been away,
CBC.
right?
And I think, and I'd be interested to hear what Brody thinks about this, because Brody came back and he got a giant job, and it was,
Yeah.
probably terrifying, but so what I'm about to say did not apply to Brody Finland. But I think when people come back, if they've been in an organization, they feel like they should be able to plug in at the next level up. And they
Right.
might not be ready to do what I did, just moving from one floor to another, which was learn the ropes again, recognize that change has happened or that you're in a different place and your skills in that one area are relevant, but not necessarily exactly the right fit, and that you have to be in the mode of learning and bring some humility to that.
Hmm.
And I think that that can be hard for people who leave and return.
Hmm. So it sounds
That
like your return, Brody, was kind of exceptional in the sense of, getting this huge job after you've been teaching, you've been away. You're in a really different mode, although it was a related field in the sense of, teaching journalism and so on. And and after you had been through some kind of, disillusionment around what was going on, how was it for you stepping back and sort of, what can you relate about that experience for you?
Well, I mean, I think yeah, it is true. Ruth is so right. I mean, you really do. You want to be prepared to do something different and not hold on to where you were in necessarily, because I do think it was a bit of an exception. But the other lesson in that for me was, uh, you see people choose to leave, and they can leave. A good way or a bad way. Like I've always believed, this business is too small to burn bridges, and there were I could have left and made noise about the things I didn't like, even though I wasn't leaving because I was disgruntled. But
Right.
I left as well as I could, and
Hmm.
um, and um, and I the way back really it depends on who you were when you were there in the first place.
Hmm.
So I had built relationships and people trusted me, and I had some people who wanted me back to work with them, and that was just built on my years of work with them. So um, I think there's a way back for anyone who's got talent and has built relationships and is seen as trustworthy, but also who doesn't go out in a blaze of glory and that happens because
Yeah.
when you go through stagnation or burnout or no place. I've worked in a number of newsrooms is perfect, and there's always something to be unhappy about. Uh, but if you make that as you go out the door, there is an inclination for some people to say, "Now's my time. I got nothing to lose, and I'm going to let them know." But that ends up being the last impression you leave with people, and
Right.
it's not always the best one.
Mhm.
Hmm. Well, that brings us to maybe some solutions and, sort of kind of renewal strategies, to this situation that mid-career and senior journalists find themselves in. So I wondered if we could just sort of take a moment to maybe pick up on something that Brody had said before was about managing and advocating their own careers. And I guess that's a part about getting back into the industry as well. Having the right contacts, having done the kind of things that you thought you left the industry well, I guess well liked and appreciated, and so you're able to, to bring that back, and get yourself into a position that, was worth what you were looking for, and important to, to that company. What kinds of things can journalists do, Ruth, to be able to move in those kind of direction, to manage and advocate for their own careers?
While they're in a place, you mean, Linton?
I think so. I think Brody
Yeah.
mentioned that he sort of didn't know that people appreciated in the way in which he did, and precisely because he hadn't he hadn't talked about where he wanted to go, what he
Right.
wanted to do, what were his aspirations, etc., etc. So in your terms, I mean, you have other issues, being a woman, being black, etc. Those kinds of things are issues which don't play in Brody's world. So what did that do for you in terms of having to manage and advocate for yourself within the industry?
Oof. Um, yeah, there were different points where different things worked.
Hmm.
I think I was always somebody who just put my head down and worked. And when I raised my head, if I didn't like something, and Brody knows this, unfortunately, I've always been opinionated. It's very
Hmm.
clear when I'm dissatisfied with something, not necessarily always an attractive quality, um, but I was also willing to work my butt off. Uh,
Hmm.
And I tried not to make assumptions about why. I don't know what is in other people's minds. So and this isn't, we're all very different in our approach
Right.
to these things, but I have never assumed that I didn't get an opportunity because of where I was born or the color of my skin or the gender that I have. Um, I may be wrong, but I don't, until somebody says something out loud that indicates, and
Mhm.
that has happened,
Right.
um, until they've indicated their opinion, I
Right.
don't know it. I can
Mhm.
ask for it. Um, so my solution was always just to work my butt off. But I think, the thing that I've learned that I didn't necessarily do, so I'm going to turn your question around, Linton, if that's okay, is
Certainly.
as a leader who was managing mid-career people, um, I would now say that just approach it's nobody else's responsibility to manage your career
Right.
but yours. You can ask for help, but you need to know what the help is that you want. Um, Approaching all of it with curiosity, I think, is the key.
Hmm.
I talked to somebody recently who went into her manager's office and said that she wanted a new job because she was bored. And I thought, well, what do you think your boss is going to do with that information?
That's that's pretty brilliant.
Um, and I the thing that worked for me when I was a manager was somebody coming in and saying, this new thing that everybody's talking about, this new strategy, this whatever shiny object, because we always have one in
Hmm.
leadership, as people complain about, there's always a new one.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, tell me more about that. And what do you think I can do that fits into this thing that I'm still trying to figure out? Because that's what's in your manager's brain is how do we get from here to there? And
Right.
as the employee in a mid-career, you undoubtedly have something that you can do that you haven't thought of in that new world fully because you don't fully understand
Hmm.
what that new world is.
Right.
And I think just approaching with curiosity as opposed to seeking solutions from somebody else um, is the thing that I would do differently that I didn't necessarily always do.
Right.
I always had opinions, but I didn't necessarily frame them against anything in particular
Right.
that was a strategic goal.
Hmm. Now, Brody, I imagine in your responsibilities at the CBC, you oversee a lot of people, and there are a lot of careers that people are formulating under you. So taking the flip that Ruth has talked about in terms of looking at it from a manager's perspective, um, where you are going to evaluate the journalists under you and who is going to be good for this, that, or the other thing. How did those people come to your attention? I mean, in terms of what is it that you do, in your position to take into account all these different people, as Ruth had mentioned, we're all different. We're all, we all do different things and have different expertise. What is it that you do that maybe can help a person that you may even feel is stagnating or getting toward burnout, or just be able to navigate their careers?
Well, I think the thing that I try to do is to be ready for that conversation, but I do need people to put their hands up because you're right. It's a huge organization with a lot of people, and it's difficult sometimes. You can't read people's minds. Sometimes you're surprised to learn that somebody you think is rocking it in their job. They're amazing. You think they're happy, and actually they end up very disappointed when you didn't approach them about an opportunity that you have no idea they might be interested in.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I encounter. And, I just had a conversation with somebody who is stagnating and looking for another opportunity. And they have identified a need for something that as Ruth said, they came to me with a proposal, and it's not going to work out perfectly. So the second thing is to not give up, though, because that proposal, which won't happen, led to another conversation, which opened up a door that I hadn't considered. And as we talk it through, something takes shape where
Okay,
there's
great.
something else this person could do.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing I've been thinking a lot about today, actually, because again, as I said, I was at this retirement for a colleague of mine who has had an incredibly varied career, which is one of the blessings of the CBC, actually. It's not like every organization is like this. There are multiple career paths. But what she said was when a door opens, and in this case, she's talking about doors that open through the course of her career at the CBC, she walked through. She would rarely close them, even when they weren't necessarily what she was thinking was going to be her destiny. So she went from being an associate producer and working on journalism to ultimately at one point working in operations, then to working in industrial relations and the HR side, and then management, and then she's done a million different things. And for her, that was her way of fending off stagnation. It was, well, there's an interesting job. I wonder if that might be, there's a learning opportunity. I don't know a ton about it, but and she would go for it. And I think sometimes I see people who get fixed in especially in journalism, because you think I'm going to be a reporter, and then I'm a reporter forever for a long, long time. And then I'm really not sure what the next thing is. And maybe the manager of the reporters, it seems narrow, but maybe those skills you might find something really rewarding in another part of the business, HR, technical, communications and marketing, entertainment. So I think that would be the other piece of advice I have. But back to the original idea, which is, as Ruth said, you really do have to own your career. Right. As much as people will care about you, and your bosses, and good bosses will be plugged into how you're doing, and a good boss will be able to ask the question that will enable you to say, well, you know what, actually I am feeling like it's time to do something different. But just remember, those bosses have a lot on their plate, and sometimes you just need to wave and ask for the time, and be persistent.
Well, does sort of building a niche, within the industry, does that sort of help, or does that hinder? I mean, or do we really continually have to look at exploring, opening those new doors, and walking through them within the industry? Ruth?
I want to hear what Brody has to say about that one, actually. I think it's incumbent on you to find things, to be in touch with what makes you happy about your work, and to really get it. Not like I'm a sports reporter and I want to be a sports reporter for life, or I want to do the Olympics because I'm a sports reporter. Think about the why you love doing something and follow that. And actually like I ended up doing a lot of work around inclusion in newsrooms. And that happened because I was frustrated a little. I wouldn't call it boredom or stagnation, but I was a little bit frustrated. And I decided I was only going to put my hand up to volunteer for things that kind of touched my heart. And it was like the theme emerged. I hadn't thought of it that way. And it ended up, I wouldn't have ended up in my final job if I hadn't done that work, I think. So it's a roundabout answer to your question, but I do think that finding a niche should only happen if it's what you love, if it's the thing that's going to make you jump out of bed in the morning, and if it's not worth trying to find a niche to distinguish yourself from other people unless that is true.
That's an interesting comment. Brody?
Yeah, that's so well said. I mean, I think of two people I know who have found a niche. One was a reporter who suffered PTSD in the course of covering a trial, and then began to channel that concern and his own experience into a conversation about well-being in newsrooms. And then he learned and asked for a bit of time to do some research that was beneficial for us. And over time, he created a role that didn't even know it was possible to have a role. Like, I mean, we call him our well-being champion, but that was that came out of taking something that was negative, but actually but became a passion project for him. So as Ruth said, it was a niche, but it was driven by really caring about something. Another colleague of mine has just a fierce interest in AI and how it's being used in journalism, and so it did a bunch of learning really quickly, raised his hand for a conference, and suddenly he's the expert now.
Right.
And then there's a realization within management, geez, yeah, we need experts, and we need to put a little group of people together, and this person is right at the front of the line for a job like that. So again, though, it's all his passion.
Mm-hmm.
So there are opportunities to do that. And then as I said, sometimes though there's opportunities that are just sitting there in a job that you might not have considered before. And maybe you want to look to see, actually, is there something that you would find passion within this new thing you hadn't entertained?
Right. Well, that sort of leads us to be discussing, if you're going to be managing and looking at advocating for your own career, how do you set boundaries between, the employee and an employer, as somebody, without really jeopardizing your career? And, I know that people you've talked about, some people are very annoying, or there's always a problem, or there's something like that, and Ruthie mentioned that somebody went into their boss's office, said, "I'm bored," and what can they do? And that's a bold move. So, where is that balance in terms of advocating for your own self, looking at issues that you think need to be dealt with, taking a chance to go out on a limb in some way, in within your newsroom, and and jeopardizing your career by, that insistence that there need to be some attention needs to be paid to this issue or to that issue. Ruth?
I think tone is everything.
Mhm.
And we all have this moment, I think, if you're a parent, and I know not everybody who's listening is a parent, but I remember distinctly this moment with when my kid was little, and I thought, oh my God, my parents had no idea what they were doing. They were just making it up as they went along.
Right.
Like, I should not be so wound up about all of the my grievances,
Hmm.
And I think that as a leader, I looked around at one point and thought, oh my God, everybody here is just doing their freaking best. Like, sometimes you don't know what's going to happen next, and you're just making the best decisions you can as a leader. And I think that um, I had lots of people on my teams who disagreed with things, or who took issue or wanted to challenge or whatever. They had questions. And the difference between the people I had a long, helpful, and informative conversation with and the people I didn't was tone, and
Hmm.
just the acceptance that we're all trying to figure stuff out, and we just have different jobs, and different roles to play in whatever the thing is that's happening. And I appreciated when people came to me and said, I've really been noticing this, and I don't know if it's just me, but this doesn't seem right, is a very
Hmm.
different thing than, what are you going to do about blah,
Hmm.
Um, and both have their place in a workplace. Like, I have been the second person that I just described.
Hmm.
But I think that the humility and the tone matters. And if you're angry about something, take a walk before you walk into your boss's office to discuss it. I think that would be my advice.
Brody, what is your experience then?
Well, I once had a boss, after having spent some time in the burnout zone, and then my boss realized, and something she said to me, which was really helpful, was part of your job for me is to identify what you need to
Hmm.
be successful, because I want you to be successful, and I need you to not burn out. I need you to help me manage you by being so. Now, that was a good boss, and there are, of course, not so good bosses. But in a perfect world, you are able to, and I think, by the way, newsrooms have come are really have moved on the understanding of work-life balance. Well, and they have to, because they're just not going to be able to employ anybody, because that's the demands of employees today, is that there is a balance, and that well-being and mental health matter. And I think even in my career, which is now 25 years, I've seen just enormous change. And having said that too, it's work, and it's an employer-employee relationship, and the employer can only go so far in making your life perfect. And then at some point, the employer has needs, which are, it's a business that they're running, and they have customers to serve, and you either are going to be a part of that, or you have to choose maybe not to be. And I think that's the other thing, that sometimes you're not going to find everything you need, and it's okay to say, this isn't for me. It's harder, if you're in a place like with a great pension, for example. You see people in mid to late careers who are now, they're stuck and they're spinning their wheels, but they're also feel a little bit trapped because they can't walk away from, and that's a really not a great place to be. So I would be encouraging people to have the conversation. It's much better to have a rewarding last few years of your career rather than just sitting waiting for a pension date, for example. And those without pensions, I mean, it's easier to move around. But I have moved, and I've moved and given up lots of stuff like that. But I did it because I saw an opportunity or a way of being challenged, or I was thinking to myself, this next move. I mean, one of the biggest moves I made early in my career was I was a full-time city hall reporter for a daily newspaper, big city. In my mind, I made it. And then I took a part-time weekend shifts on the web, which at that time no one wanted to be on the web, at the Globe and Mail. So it was a lesser job for less money, less security. I had a child. It was a leap of faith, but I thought I could make something of that, and I thought it would be good for my career in the long run, and it was. So that's the other thing, is sometimes you have to take a bit of a leap. And you take a step down and then rebuild up.
So you have to have a plan B, as it were.
Yeah, well, just to realize that leaving a place doesn't mean the end of your career or your future. And in fact, sometimes leaving a place actually leads to better and bigger things down the road.
Mm-hmm.
You gain new experiences, you see new ways of working.
So it's not necessarily a setback in terms of your career. It just may, be opening to different ways of seeing things, viewing things, learning things, and understanding a little bit more about who you are and what kind of role you want to play within your chosen profession.
Yeah, and ironically, sometimes people will leave and then they will gain new experiences that, and then be sought to come back and actually hired in a better position. I've seen that before in a number of places because they've gained experience that is valuable for the original employer.
Mm-hmm. Well, as managers, Ruth, you had referred to before how you've managed people and were managing careers. How do you manage your own stress? While we're sort of managing the other stresses as well, in terms of your team, and those people who are direct reports to you.
I'm just going to say I wasn't always great at that. I think for me, sleep. I mean, you gotta know what gives you what rejuvenates you.
Mm-hmm.
Connecting with the things and the people that you love the most. But sleep, holy cow. Like I did not get enough sleep, and I still feel it's been more than 7 months since I retired, and I feel like I'm getting close to catching up.
Mm-hmm.
But and just your health. It's stress takes a toll on your health, and you pay a price over the long term, especially.
Mm-hmm.
So I think whatever that takes. For me, it was travel, sleeping, hanging out with my friends, going for long rambles in the woods. But for everybody, it's different.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, at CBC and I think at other places, there's a survey that we used to do around employee engagement. And one of the questions is, do you have a best friend at work? And everybody complained about that question being on the survey. But I have to say that having somebody in your workplace and not in your home life necessarily, that you can actually have a frank and open conversation and maybe not be your best self for a couple of minutes. The periods of time when I had that, my stress levels were better.
Right.
Because
You were managing better.
sometimes you just need to let off steam and you
Mhm.
need to be able to do it in a safe place, and that's a game changer.
All right. Well, one of the questions we wanted to ask, Brody, was about, how do you disconnect from the sort of the digital noise and protect your sort of your mental space within that? And I'd maybe like to explore that a little bit with you, given the stress that you must have in terms of managing all those different fronts, that you have to deal with at the CBC.
Well, maybe I'll just one thing on the previous question, which I think is really important to just make sure you're caring for the garden of your personal life, as in your relationships with people. When I have been at my worst in my job is when something is not working at home, where a child is not something's not right, or your relationship, your spouse is not good. I mean, it is so obvious, I know, but we don't actually talk a lot about how so much of your success and happiness professionally is going to depend on how well things are working at home, or with your friend group, or with the person you chose to spend your life with. And are you on the same page about money? And so you got it. That stuff matters. In terms of like the turning things off, I don't think I've been great at it. But there was a moment where, I mean, it sounds silly, but like I hit the wall with Twitter, X. I hit the wall with the amount of abuse that was coming at me personally, but also about my organization or about people I worked with. And then I said, what am I doing? And I was in the trap of like going to bed with a bit of doom scrolling and feeling so much worse after a session on that platform. And I had this real, okay, this is just, I'm going to cut it out of my life. It's a toxic thing. And so sometimes you do have to stop and ask hard questions. What are you doing? Because, and why are you being pulled into this stuff? I try to set an example by, I have to sometimes catch up on work off hours or on weekends. I think most people
Everybody does, right?
Yeah, but I try to schedule those emails to land during working hours for people. Like I try my best not to create an expectation that just because I'm on, I would assume other people are on. And I remember what it's like when you get a boss texting you with a question at 8 p.m. And that still happens to me. And then that is setting a bad expectation, even though I don't think my boss is expecting me to be ready. It's just, you're not thinking through. So you have a role in setting the example around you that gives people permission to be off, to turn things off. It can be as simple as saying, after this hour, call me because I'm not going to check email or G-chats. I mean, but it's easier said than done, and it's very easy to fall into bad habits.
Can I just add something
Sure.
there in terms of, so for people who are mid-career or early in their careers, I think you get that email from your boss or whatever, there's stuff going on. I think it's a fair conversation to have with your supervisor. What is the expectation? What
Right.
do you expect me to answer emails on the weekend if you send me an email? Because you jump, there's stress. I remember getting emails from people who I found big and powerful and scary. 10 o'clock
Yeah.
on a Saturday after a couple of glasses of wine, and I'm thinking, I am not in condition to give a good response to this. What is the
Right.
expectation? And so I finally asked, and the expectation was not what I thought.
Mm.
It was, as Brody said, I'm just receiving, park it.
Right. Well, I mean,
They're not thinking this is ruining this person's weekend.
right. Well, I remember getting from actually a very considerate boss who would precede his emails with this saying, look, I'm working, but I can't expect you to be working at the same time. All right. But, I have this issue or something like that, and maybe it's something we can deal with on the Monday or the next day at a more appropriate hour. But at least, you were you weren't, scared. You're saying, well, if I don't answer, am I gonna, am I gonna, lose my job or something like that, and that is all about that management approach, and I think managing people is always difficult, and sometimes it's like herding cats and, and other times it's a real pleasure because of the way that you've set it up, the way that you've allowed your team members to feel, whole in what they're doing and being respected for what it is, that they do and how that fits into the definition of everything that you're trying to do in your office. And so I wonder how you, sort of as a final question, how you manage that, through your careers. What did you do to be able to make people feel whole, make them feel that they're respected for their opinions, what they contributed, and how that fit into the team concept that you were building in order for you to accomplish whatever the goals and objectives are of your particular bureaus or your particular levels of work. Could you start out that, Brody?
Oh, I mean, I think I try as a leader to be, first of all, to practice empathy and really, so try to give the benefit of the doubt, try to put myself in someone's shoes. And I think listening matters so much. I mean, people really know when you're paying attention
Mm-hmm.
and when you're not.
Right.
And they can see through an authentic interaction. And so I think about that a lot. Like, and again, life is demanding and your phone's going off but people tend to talk to you and they want to be heard. And if you're distracted, if you're superficial in your responses, if it's coming in and going out, you will lose the whole floor. So that takes work and time, and it's not easy. But that's what I try to do, is be an authentic, genuine listener. I'm not sure if I answered
No,
the question.
that's great. That's an excellent, management point because so many people feel that they're not listened to
Yeah.
within their whatever field they are within their, that management structure. Ruth,
Hey,
have you got?
Linton, can we take some time to listen to our participants who have some questions?
Yes, yes.
Right.
I certainly did. I was talking about that being the sort of the closing question, but I did want to have Ruth's comments before we open it up to questions.
I'll just keep it short so we can get to the questions. I think trying to be conscious that we had this, people were talking about introversion earlier. Not everybody is going to engage comfortably with you, and just being aware. Sometimes you have to make the approach, and some people, I remember a couple of people would just put their head down when I came because they didn't know what to say to me. But you kind of have to get past that, and it's actually your job as the leader to find a way to just let people know that your door is open, that it's open for them, that they don't have to be the rock star in the newsroom or the big investigator or the shiny new person, to actually just be available and to be available equally for everybody. And it's easier said than done because sometimes, and for me, stress, my empathy meter, I know I need to take a day off if my empathy bucket is getting empty. But on a good day, I think that that's important, and just simple greetings and regular human behavior in a newsroom can sometimes go a long way because we skip that in newsrooms because there's such high pressure environments.
Mhm. Excellent. Well, I think it is time for us to be able to take a few questions, and I think you've given a lot of people something, a lot of things to ponder, all right, and maybe, pose some questions concerning that. So I want to bring in Brian Daly, who is a professor at King's College in Nova Scotia teaching journalism. He's been filtering the questions for us. So, Brian, can you give us an idea of what the first question is?
Sure, I filtered it down to one question for each of our panelists. So we'll start with a question for Ruth. We have an anonymous attendee asking any tips for marginalized journalists navigating systemic barriers and microaggressions at work.
At work. Well, that's a hard one because without specifics, I would say uh, I'm hoping you found your people. First of all, I'm sorry that if that's what's happening to you personally, that it's awful. And we talked about stagnation and burnout. This is a whole different thing that makes you not want to get out of bed and go to work. So uh, I think that best friend at work comment I made earlier is really
Right.
important. Test driving what you're experiencing, and if microaggressions are real um, and they're getting in the way of your ability to do your job, I think you want to talk to somebody in some sort of leadership capacity, and I'm hoping there's somebody that you trust who you can speak to about it. Uh, I'll add to that that in my experience, having experienced some microaggressions and outright racism, um, there used to be this cold-hearted guy I worked with, and he used to say, "How is this affecting your ability to do your job?" And it just used to make me angry. But do all the things I just said, and then do a freaking good job.
Mm.
Because chances are, whoever is behaving this way is doing it from a place of insecurity, boredom, stagnation, burnout, any number of things. They're not in a good place if that's how they're treating you. You should not have to deal with that in the workplace, but if you want to be a journalist and you love journalism, focus on that as much as you can, but ask for help too.
Mm-hmm. So, Brian, your question for Brody.
Yes, this I guess would be the final question is for Brody. We have another anonymous participant who's asking that what if an employee tries everything and they find that the stagnation continues?
I'm sorry to hear that. And uh, at some point, I think you get to the point where you have to make a hard choice. Sometimes the choice is that you're stagnating because the leadership is just not the leadership for you, and you need to find another boss or another team. And I know that's easier said than done. And um, but if if you've tried the things we've suggested and you've raised your hand and you've had the conversation and you've looked where you could provide passion and value for something different and you're still stuck, then maybe you're getting close to a really hard choice. um, I don't know, Ruth, maybe you have some other ideas, but uh, uh, sometimes you're in a place where, yeah, it's hard to get out of it because there's just not enough options, and that's the hardest place to be. But it sometimes means it's a radical decision you've got to make, and then you've got to just ask yourself, what is the cost of staying and having this continue, and is there any hope that it might change? And if not, well, then life is too short.
Right.
You know.
Effectively, that you're absolutely right. Well, I want to thank you both. This has been a very enlightening conversation, and I hope there's people who have gotten a lot out of this. I do want to ask Ruth, I understand that you're talking about that you're doing a leadership training. Is there any place that people can find you on the net or anything like that who are interested in
Sure. I'm on LinkedIn
your
is the best place to reach me, Linton.
through LinkedIn? Okay.
Yeah, LinkedIn, I'm there. I'm coaching leaders now,
Mhm.
and that's my focus, but I'm happy to connect with anybody on LinkedIn.
All right, thank you. And Brody, you must be so busy with so many things that you're doing, but people wanted to reach out to you and get a chance to have a conversation, talk about, whatever in terms of the field and opportunities and so on at CBC. Where might they be able to contact you?
So it's my first name dot last name at cbc.ca, and just be patient with me, but I will respond. It just takes sometimes days, maybe sometimes weeks, because I get a lot of email, but I care about doing that, and I really do try to make that happen. So yes, feel free to reach out.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's it for us. I just one reminder, please fill in that survey that you found in the events program. You could win $100 gift card of your choice. And I want to remind you that this conversation and the previous one about the early journalists our new journalists will be, published on our website sometime next week. So thank you. Uh, Ms. Zodu, Mr. Fenlon, very much for your participation and an enlightening contribution to our Spark event. And then a final thank you to our sponsors, In Spirit Foundation and the Globe and Mail, for their support for this event. So I wish you all a good evening and thank you for having spent your valuable time with us. Much appreciated.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Linton, and
Good
thanks
night.
to Jennifer too for being the behind the scenes mastermind.
Yeah, we couldn't have done it without her,
Yes.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye, folks.